Right. So, Mickey, today we are here to discuss one of your famous memes and the impact of what your meme describes on the contingent workforce market, the procurement market, the whole kind of services procurement gambit. So, a lot of people out there in the procurement and contingent workforce world will already know you as the co-founder of Emberpath and also the founder of CWM Strategies and the owner of the finest kind of extended workforce, contingent workforce procurement set of memes available on LinkedIn or the internet as a whole, I would imagine. Um, can you just, for those that don't know you, can you do a quick intro and a reminder for those that already do know you of who you are and what you're up to?
Right. I call myself the CW meme king. Self-titled, although some have called me that as well. But anyway, yeah, Mickey Pelletier. I create content around the contingent workforce world, the workforce management, the world that a lot of us live in, sort of making light and poking at some of the things that are going on in our industry. I also run a consulting practice, CWM Strategies, that focuses on helping clients figuring out what do they want to be when they grow, what do they want their contingent workforce to be when they grow up, and strategizing how to grow, mature, and figure out that program and the slew of services that come with that. I also support providers that are helping clients with their contingent workforce solutions. So, also the co-founder of Emberpath. It's an up-and-coming technology looking at the entire human capital spectrum and workforce selection, decisioning, of course, powered by AI, but everything is these days. And that's a work in progress. But really excited, yeah, to speak with you today on the topic we got, all stemming from a meme and a post that was on LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, you're very good at getting the conversation going on LinkedIn and getting some debate happening, using a bit of a light-hearted touch to pull people into the conversation, which is brilliant. And I really appreciate you doing that. Um, the particular meme in question was basically looking at the hidden risks, hidden costs, and basically kind of like hidden contracting that so often exists within services procurement or the statement of work kind of spend within organizations. And that's what I want to talk about today. There's a few kind of questions that we started going back and forth on LinkedIn. And we were like, hey, let's just do this in another podcast. So I think it was the right thing to do. What I'm going to briefly try and do is share that meme just so anyone who's watching this can get an idea of it, of what we're talking about. So this is the meme of a project manager under a statement of work with a mask on being unmasked by a gallant CW program manager to reveal, as always, the unexpected villain in the story, a Staff Aug worker billing $75 an hour more than the Staff Aug rate card. Naughty, naughty, happens all the time. We've all seen it. So great meme, love it. Let me just stop sharing there, bring us back. So that topic is something that spawned a bit of a debate and a conversation between you and I, because I started rattling off a few questions to you. And I appreciate sometimes when you're posting stuff and it might be like you're at different time zones and things like that. And I was like, bam, 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 here's some questions. You were like, oh, hang on a minute. I like to think about some of these. These are quite deep questions, which is obviously why we're here to discuss them today. But immediately I saw that. I mean, it's not that long ago. You and I were at in Texas for CWS Dallas, and we get to talk at these events and listen to what's going on in the market. And my kind of reaction to seeing that was like, how many people actually care about this? Like what percentage of the market is aware of it? But not only aware of it, it feels like it's a problem that needs to be solved. And not only that, but is truly motivated to do something about it. That was my first question of saying, okay, you've got these services procurement, the services procurement spend might sit in different categories. Some of it might be seen as like SOW spend, depending on how it's termed. that sits alongside maybe some of the contingent workforce activity. It sits in different places in different businesses, this magical world of services procurement. But effectively, under these statement of work engagements, sometimes there are hidden costs, hidden risks, and kind of like bad practices. Firstly, to expand the question a little further, what sort of percentage of companies that you deal with, or that you've seen, or that you hear of in the market, do you think that that is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a vast majority of companies are have misrepresented, statement of work workers, workers that are staff aug, that are truly staff aug based on either their treatment, their usage, their engagement model, that are brought in under a statement of work. Despite that, I think most are doing that in one form or another, whether that's intentional or just it's just how, intentional or not, right? I think many are doing that. Now, to the second part of, how many are looking to make a change and shift that, yeah, I wish I had numbers because obviously this has been known for a while. In my early days, working for an MSP, 15, 16, 17 years ago, there was this, oh, we need to go after this hidden spend. And it's been a big thing that the industry has stood on for a while. And I think if many companies were motivated to do it, they would have done it already. But it's an enormous shift to go away from the model and the usage and the treatment of the workers, and the suppliers that they have relationships with. Is there a enormous change management effort to go away from what they're used to? So I think companies are interested, but they're not truly serious about making a change in their behavior.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So most companies have the problem, but you're saying under 50% are really motivated to do something about it.
Yeah, I
But
think that was what I said in my post. I'd say under 50%. I mean, a ballpark figure. I have no we need a solid research firm to figure that out for us. But yeah, definitely under 50%. And we could talk about the reasons behind that if you want, because there's different motivations behind that are driving that. And I think the interesting thing is that you talk about how many companies are interested in making a change. Well, I think it becomes more nuanced in that because it may depend on your persona, whether you are in HR, whether you're in procurement, whether you're in the C-suite, whether you're just the engagement manager that's trying to engage talent or trying to engage a service. Your motivation is going to vary across that persona spectrum, right? And who has the actual authority to make that change? You need enough of the people at the bottom of the food chain that are doing the work, executing on a lot of this to really push that up to the true decision makers. And then you factor in the people that own the relationship with these suppliers. A lot of that, I hate to go after them, but the big consulting firms, or maybe it is the smaller consulting firms that are clearly bringing in staff aug talent under a statement of work, saying it's services, but it's really, staff aug, temporary work. Um, so
I mean,
yeah, a couple thoughts on that. Go
one of
ahead.
the other things I was going to ask you was, do you think most organizations that have this problem, do you think they're aware of it, or do you think a lot of them just aren't really aware of it?
Uh, at a yeah, an organization level, yes, I think they're aware that this is a thing that, hey, we're spending more than we should, or we have workers that are not appropriately classified, hidden under, statement of work services. Yeah, I think they're aware of it. Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
people in procurement, I think, are very aware of it. The people in HR that are closest to human capital management have a general awareness of that. Now, beyond that, I think legal can get involved and concerned when, the threat of misclassification or anything comes in or anything that impacts employment law or where they need to get their hands on it. Technology, I don't know if they're the IT, if they care so much. But I think those personas have a general awareness and possible appetite to make a change, but I think it's dependent upon more senior leadership to enable that change.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you talk about misclassification, obviously, and the risks around that, there are a variety of risks associated with that, and they can be quite region specific.
Yeah.
For example, if you're in Europe, in, I don't know, Germany, for example, very strict legislation around that. If you're in the UK, now very strict legislation around that. If you're in the USA, don't know whether it varies, state to state, even in some cases, but the legislation, the onus of responsibility for correct classification is more on the worker than it is on the organization, right?
Well, I think when you come in as a temporary worker, an agency worker, staff aug, one of our 50 terms to describe one thing, you're the obviously you're the employee of that staffing agency. I mean, it's up to them to classify you appropriately. But then the idea of co-employment, they're providing a worker to another company to engage, co-employment, not using it as a dirty taboo word, but the idea of joint employment, control over the work. I mean, I think that's not really on the worker. Same thing with statement of work services. The worker is an employee of that service provider, and there's joint control engagement of that worker. I think it gets down to the worker level when you are an independent contractor. Someone as myself, I'm Mickey Pelletier. I'm an employee of CWM Strategies. However, I'm technically an independent consultant because I'm just a one-man band, one-man operation going out there. So it's very important for me to ensure that I have the um, trying to think of the right word. I have all of the qualifications, the certification, the things that deem me as a true independent contractor, so that when a company is going to engage me, whatever protocols they have to protect themselves, I'm living up to meet those standards. So I think the onus ends up being me coming to the table to say, yes, I truly am an independent contractor. Here, let me document it and prove that for you. But then it's also on that company that's going to engage me to ensure that they have those protocols in place, whether that is making sure I have the proper insurance, that I am my own entity, I have a tax ID, um, things like that, and that they also have governance and education on their side of, hey, Mickey's an independent contractor. We can't control his work day to day. We can't tell him hour by hour what he should be doing and how he should be doing it. We end up telling him what we want, and he figures out the best way to do that, perhaps with some collaboration along the way. I mean, that's typically how I define it. So, going back to the root of your question, is it really on the worker for staff aug and services? No, it's on the employers and the engagement company, the client. It's up to them. On the worker level, it's really on the independent contractor and the company that's engaging them to make sure they're both protecting themselves. That's where I think the independent contractor piece is the biggest risk.
Yeah, and I think that's where I say the key difference exists in terms of how that's set up in the US versus maybe Europe, for example.
Right.
Um, and just some of the conversations I had at CWS Dallas, like the size of that worker population, that type of labor usage, service usage in the US, the amount of independent contractors that sit under statement of work is was I was a little bit surprised by some of the volume that people were talking about. So I do know it can be potentially quite a big problem for some companies. But again, it's also delving into it, isn't it? It's understanding, mapping out what your situation looks like in terms of how you're using external resources of any kind. So it falls into that bracket of stuff that people see as quite complicated. There's lots of different regulatory and risk implications around it. It's not just a dead simple kind of binary one or zero kind of setup. So I think that potentially does hold some people back from addressing it at some point, but some points. But the interesting thing about seeing when people do want to address it, what within the little world of services procurement I would regard as like the enlightened ones, people that for whatever reason within their organization have said, this is my responsibility. I've got this services procurement stuff to look after. It's all under statement of work engagements. Some of it looks like big projects with big consulting firms, and some of it looks like body shopping, and some of it looks like tiny projects with independent contractors. But it's all sat under this kind of banner of statement of work type engagement models. And where they're in that situation where they're like, this is my responsibility. I need to do something about it because I'm worried about X or Y. And that's when they start, going out to market. And those are the people that, as I say, I refer to as the enlightened ones. Those are the people that we try to talk to. There are very different reasons for why they want to address it. Because that was one of the things when you put that post out there, I was like, right, Mickey, what are you hearing? What is it that's driving the people that do want to solve this? And you came back to me and said, and I quote, the usual suspects, savings, compliance, visibility. So a nice, succinct answer, but I just want to kind of like deconstruct that a little bit because there's quite a
Yeah.
lot to that. So
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, the usual suspects. I mean, why do you want to take the time to provide the governance, have a technology process, all that? I think a big motivator, perhaps in the finance and procurement side, is that cost savings. We go back to the meme of the worker billing $75 over the Staff Aug rate card, all because they're under a statement of work, right? So I mean, if you could unmask that, you could bring about 6, 7, 8-digit savings very easily just by having the right type of classification aligned with a certain type of work and what is the outcome you're going for. I think that's just a huge component of it. If we could bring that savings back by having classification, having classified a worker the appropriate way, man, I think that's a huge motivator. If you can go back to your company and be like, hey, we could save $11 million by doing this the right way and routing things to the proper channels. Obviously, the compliance standpoint, we want to make sure that our workers are aligned with the right classification. Um, and the implications with that, I think it gets the most murky and risky when it is an independent contractor. There is risk of misclassification between staff aug and then a services worker, but I don't think anybody's really going to go to jail for it. Not that that's
no,
legal advice, but I don't think people are as concerned. But it is important because if you have a worker that is on services, providing services to you, they're providing a service. There should be very limited control from um, from the company that's engaging them, right? I'm asking you for a service, um, and the service provider, whether you're providing one or 100 people, that should be immaterial to us. We're only really worried about the outcome, right? So there's engagement, excuse me, there's treatments of the worker that I think differentiate that classification and direct you towards certain channels because the risk, statement of work, services work do tend to cost more. Why? Because the risk is on that service provider to provide it as you requested, whether that's one or 100 headcount under it under warranty as well. So if you provide them the deliverable and it's not correct, they got to go back and fix it at no additional cost because that was you're providing XYZ for ABC amount of dollars, right? So classifying the work that way is really important because it stems back to treatment and utilization, but it also stems back to the cost, the control, the responsibility, and the roles that both parties play in that engagement. So I think that's a huge component of it as well, of why you want to do that and be able to classify properly. And the third piece, the third usual suspect, that visibility. You know, we said that under this statement of work, we don't necessarily care if we have one or 100 workers. That's up to the service provider to um, figure out. However, if I'm a client engaging that, I would like to know the workers that are on that, particularly if they're going to have access to any IP, any of our systems. It's good to know that. If they're going to have access to any buildings, you certainly want to be able to document that as well. The tricky part comes in is, as we all know, with a lot of these larger engagements, these larger services, these larger statement of works, is that people come and go. I know from my time with Accenture, I'd pop in for a project for 3 days, and that project had been going on for 10 months, right? And I came and go, I provided my subject matter expertise, and I popped out. Should they have entered me into the VMS? That's a question for debate. And some will say, absolutely. Yeah, they should be. We should know Mickey was attached to this statement of work at one point or another. Others will be like, boy, that's a little bit overzealous, over the top. That's too much, right? And I think the companies that are leveraging contingent services need to make that decision. To what degree do they want visibility, and what's important to them? And you'll hear different thought leaders say different perspectives of that. Personally, I think it's important to know who is doing the work for you. If you can name the bodies, great. And what are they tied to? I also recognize that that becomes very tricky, because of the reasons I just stated. So it's nice to know the visibility, who's doing what, where, when, why, and at what cost. But
Do you think in terms of knowing who it is it more about knowing that you're paying for three senior associates, so you've got three senior associates, not two junior associates and one senior associate? Or is it more about knowing the individuals, knowing whether that individual did a good job, or is it more about knowing about them because they might need to log into IT systems and not you mentioned IP and stuff like that? Where where
yeah, I think
where
it
does that
varies.
sit? Is it making sure you're not getting ripped off with the type of person? Because ultimately, if an external provider is delivering a service on an output or outcome basis, which is the very definition of what we're talking about, procured services, that's what a statement of work contract is designed to capture. What are you going to, as a service provider, going to deliver to me as a client as measurable outputs? Um, yeah, is it about, am I getting what you said you'd give me, or is it more of the kind of like info security and that sort of thing?
And that's why it's fun. That's why I wanted to talk this through versus having a comment chat, because that's so nuanced. And what is the right answer? It varies from client to client and what they think is appropriate. And I think then it varies from statement of work to statement of work. And what are you trying to accomplish? Like if we know that Mickey and Johnny are attached to this SOW and they're going to be working on it for the next year, yeah, it'd be good to know who they are, particularly if they're going to be on site or have any access to things. I think depending on the arrangement as well, if we are billing an offshore worker at a US rate. If you do happen to have a time and material statement of work, I know a lot of people aren't fans of those, but I think there is an appropriate time for that, based on what the work is being done, as long as there's outcomes tied to it. I want to make sure, yeah, I'm not getting ripped off. If you're having, a worker in Manila, then we have Manila rates, and I think that's an appropriate, use case of visibility and why you want to track that. I think there's a level of trust with a statement of work, and in that you are the service and the workers you're putting out there are equivalent to what is needed to accomplish the outcome. So that's sort of the tricky thing. Like there's a lot of it depends. What are you trying to do? And I think, Johnny, that's part of the reason why there's reservation or hesitation about shaking things up and really going after it, because it requires an immense amount of analysis on each particular statement of work and the bodies that are attached to that underneath, and how is that work being done, and does this require us to know each worker and where they are and the who, what, where. That's sort of the funny thing, and why I love this industry is that's very debatable. But it also causes a lot of confusion, a lot of concern around the work effort that goes into that. Because when you think of, man, we have 500 statements of work. Across that, we have about 30,000 headcount attached to those. Boy, how do you go in and dissect that statement of work by statement of work to get the data you need to give you the full visibility that may be needed? Right? I think that's one of the complexities that I think leads to companies saying like, you know what, we'll just continue with the status quo, even though we may not have the cost savings, the visibility, the compliance that we would, optimally want to have.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be a strong enough driver for anyone to want to do something about it, and that's not every company. and it's not every setup, and it's not every stakeholder that could. They're not necessarily, like you say, for reasons you mentioned, they're not necessarily all going to be motivated to do something about it. But just to pick up on a few things you mentioned there, you mentioned there are, lots of people who aren't fans of time and materials SOW. I can tell you there are plenty of people that definitely are fans of time materials statement of work.
I say it because as a professional, like in everything I've been taught and everything I advocate, well, time and material really shouldn't be on a statement of work. But I've seen very good use cases where it does make sense, particularly when it is tied to an outcome, but there's also a cap on it. We're not going to, Johnny's spending $150 an hour, but there's a cap because the outcome is still under warranty. And if Johnny didn't get his part right, he's going to continue to work to get it right at no extra charge because we've hit our cap of what we committed to we were originally going to spend. Right. But then there's also entire outsourced like call centers. I've seen call centers outsourced. And Johnny's coming in to be the phone operator for us. Well, we're not going to likely charge a flat fee. We certainly can. That's an opportunity. But what about when the phone volume is low and Johnny's only working 2 hours a week, versus the full 40, right? We may want it to be on time and material at that point because yes, we've outsourced this service for you to manage our call center, but we don't want to pay more than your output. So there's a productivity cost or a productivity pay that's attached to it, which you could call time and material as well. So it's funny because yeah, and it's easy. It's easy. Well, we'll bring you on under statement of work, and just send us an invoice for the amount of hours that you worked for the week. Okay. Hopefully there's
Yeah.
some hopefully there's some controls around that. Otherwise, things could get out of control very quickly if it's not governed appropriately.
Well, that's where you tend to find some of the people that are like, I really need to do something about this. That's where it has got out of control because if you've got like headcount freezes within the organization, but hey, I can get a PO for a statement of work up to X nice big value, and suddenly everything that's going through it's a $100,000 value. Suddenly everything's going through at $99,000. All these projects that are going through the time and material, and you find a lot of companies that are basically sort of saying, look, and MSPs dealing with problems where they're saying there's a lot of T&M within this statement within this statement of work spend or this services procurement spend, but the aim is to shift it towards real and pure output based statement of work, services procurement. And I think ultimately there's an argument to say if you're buying outputs, you shouldn't care who's doing it. And to a certain extent, you shouldn't care where the person is located, because ultimately, if that company can deliver the effective result that you've paid for, and they're generating efficiencies on their end, good for them. They're delivering
Right, value-based, yeah, value-based pricing, and yeah, I mean, that's why I love this because there are arguments for both sides, and it really comes down to that individual statement of work. What are you trying to accomplish, and what is the most effective method to get that? Whether that's pricing, output, there's so many angles to look at it, and I love your counter to what I just said because that's a very real point. That like, hey, I don't disagree with you. That is definitely an angle.
I think ultimately, it to a certain extent, it doesn't matter how you do it, because I totally agree with what you're saying that there are certain engagements where within a statement of work based contract, some of the outputs might be blocks of consulting time, blocks of time and materials,
Yep.
effectively, which is perfectly legitimate within the right structure. Um, I think the key thing is that by not having the visibility, by not having the rigor, if you haven't got that, you're never going to be able to check that the reality of what you're paying for matches what was contracted. That's where things get a bit sticky, and that's where visibility is this kind of center point of, hey, look, you're paying for stuff, you should kind of know what you're getting and you should know what's going on. But the thing that always occurs to me is when you look at this sort of thing and look at the debate we're having and the conversation around this, the discussion, companies want to make it easy for the people that need to get work done within their organization to get that done. Like their company's going to be pretty inefficient if the stuff that needs doing and the people that need to do it can't do it. They need to be able to either hire a permanent employee or, bring in an interim or a temp or a independent contractor or whatever it might be, or outsource it to a service provider to do the work. The, and so procurement, but where there's this kind of messy situation that's quite complicated, procurement and or contingent workforce straight HR are either pushed out of the way sometimes or feel they need to get out of the way because they can't handle the volume and the complexity of it. Um, but with that ease, you lose all the rigor. And that's the other side of it that's incredibly important. It feels like this constant trade off between ease and rigor, because the rigor within that organization might be we put in headcount freezes for a reason. We don't want people bringing in, like, getting, paying to get this work done. We should be doing it with internal teams. So why the hell is all this stuff getting, squeezed out, where effectively this body shopping is happening in the background with disguised contracting being pulled in? That might be a reason why the company says we need rigor around this, or it might
Hmm.
be, a risk factor around misclassification, or it could be a safety critical industry where people are statement of work workers are under terrible contracts and really poor compliance, and they're working on um, a, a road or a rail type situation. That could be, a worker could get killed and they haven't got the provider hasn't got the right insurances, or the contract doesn't cover the liability, whatever it might be. So there's lots of things to kind of think about that, but it feels like this trade-off between ease and rigor in basically being able to get work done. Would you agree with that?
You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want, right? So like the yeah. Um I love thinking in analogies, so I'm trying to think of the right one. There's I want to get to point A to point B as fast as I can. I can't just drive my car through my neighbor's yard. I have to go on the roads, and then on the roads I have to abide by the traffic laws, and then there's other people there, and I have to be mindful of them. There's so much stuff that we have in place because it allows us to do it. Maybe not as easy as we would like, but it's also the idea of getting, depending on the size of your enterprise, 100 to 100,000 people to follow a standardized protocol. Well, it's so we have control and standardization around it. Now, is that standardization always the easiest way to get things done? No, but it allows us to know that the outcome and the way things are being done, it is it is all the same. And when you come down to things such as cost savings, compliance, and visibility, that standardization is super critical for that. And I think that's where this industry struggles, particularly around services-based work and procurement and statement of work, and there's no just easy way of getting all that savings, compliance, and visibility without dragging the process out. And I think that's something a lot of the providers are thinking about critically of how could we drive down this time and make it easier and um, enable the business to do what they need to do without creating so much red tape. Um, and I think that's part of the drawback of all of this. Because boy, it's really easy to just call up my favorite IT provide my favorite IT consulting firm, and we already have a statement of work. So yeah, we need another guy, and bam, they're there tomorrow. It's really that easy, right? Because we already have the statement of work, we're already set up, but we don't necessarily know who this person is, what they're being paid, what are they actually doing? We're just adding a body. Well, what's going on? Why do we need to add a body? There's certain things there that take away from that compliance and savings and visibility if you don't have those proper protocols in place. So the objective is to find that balance of ease of use, ease of access to talent, but also still giving you the things that businesses need. But what are their priorities? If they don't care about savings, compliance, and visibility, hell yeah, call up your favorite consulting firm and get your guy tomorrow. But what's your priority? That's and who's driving that priority, and at what level are they within the organization to have the authority to say, this is how we're all doing it?
Yeah, the drivers are so varied in reality. Like we did a survey on the SIA app at the CWS summit, So when we were sponsors, we did this primarily at the European event in London, and we ran a survey looking at what are the key drivers around people, why people want to address services procurement, what are the key barriers, who owns the problem, all this really, really interesting stuff. And just the drivers, there was a fairly even split between kind of like, risk mitigation, process efficiencies, cost savings, and yeah, just general kind of like compliance and governance, I think was the last one. But there was a split. It wasn't like everybody. And do you know what? A lot of people will say cost savings, but that isn't actually necessarily the big driver for a lot of organizations. It's surprising how many organizations will say, well, yeah, we are probably spending way more than we should be, but, no one's caring about that right now. And that might be an organization in a particular situation where they're very profitable and they're just used to the wastage, and they're used to the legacy of doing things in a certain way, and they're not really even thinking about that or worrying about it. Whereas another organization might be really up against it due to market or industry factors that mean they've got to cut costs, they've got to be lean, they can't have any wastage. But the one driver that really does seem to universally motivate organizations and stakeholders within organizations is where there's risk that's keeping that person awake at night, because they're thinking, my job is at stake, my reputation is at stake, or my company's reputation is at stake here, or I'm going to be in big trouble if something goes wrong with this from a compliance perspective. And that kind of reputational risk around, for example, in Europe or in the UK, organizations getting fined by the government for having misclassification issues, and big fines. The fine's bad, but so's the reputational damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's where it comes back to some of the kind of safety critical type stuff in industries like, I don't know, aerospace or, digital infrastructure, telecoms, that sort of thing, where organizations have got workers that are coming in through service providers, construction, engineering, consulting engineering, all that sort of stuff, where it's actually safety critical work that's being done. And that tends to lean more towards the general thing of like, there's risks here which we just cannot accept, and therefore we need to do something about it. And that sometimes feels to me like generally a stronger driver than cost savings. And it's almost like, yeah, of course, cost savings is going to be the priority for some people, but it's like, it's the obvious label that a lot of people will give it, whereas actually the thing that will get them off their chair to really jump up and down and scream and shout and say we have to do something about this will be a risk that they just feel is unacceptable. Cost savings will probably be made, almost certainly be made significantly as a byproduct of addressing that risk. But that's something that I've noticed, which is again where it comes down to like this rigor being a key driver. But like you say, you can't just disrupt the way the organization does business. What do you think of that? I mean, in terms of the kind of like,
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. It's funny because growing up in the industry, I didn't go to school for contingent workforce. None of us did. But then you start getting onto projects and various things, and you hear this word risk, and it's just sort of this catch-all. But I
what
always
does it
struggle
all
with, well,
mean?
what do you mean by risk? Like, and I think that's very there's some of the things you cited, yeah, are risky. When you're working in high danger jobs, right? You think of
Oil
like
and
mining,
gas.
oil and gas, mining, anything like that, where it's like, hey, there's like real risk of harm to coming to somebody. But then there's like risk of misclassification. And does your provider on this particular statement of work, do they have subs that are subs of subs? And who is the actual employer? And are these independent contractors? You have things like that, that's risk. You have personal well-being, which is risk. You have they have access to your buildings, or IP, things like that could be risk there. I mean, I think it's so important to define like when you're concerned about risk or compliance, what does that mean to you, enterprise? And how are you solving that? Because risk, I think, is a vague term we use to generalize something that could affect our PR, could affect our legacy, not our legacy, could affect how we're viewed to the greater good. to the greater world and how people want to either work for with us, engage with us, how people buy and consume our products, right? That's the funny thing about risk. I'm like, yeah, you can go 100 different ways depending on what does risk mean and how are you defining it in the context of contingent work, non-employee labor, services, whatnot. And I think you cited some really good examples, but I'll always go back to like so many things in our business is a definition. And what does it mean to you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like, I mean, it's the same in any industry, isn't it? There are, if you get involved in a new industry, I used to work in the job board sector back in the day, and that's how I kind of got into this whole industry around how organisations use tech to get work done. And I basically founded or set up and managed quite a few like niche job boards. I set up some of the earlier niche job boards in the UK and Europe and kind of rolled them out for larger organizations. And it was really interesting. Every time we rolled out for a new industry, banking and finance, oil and gas, whatever it might be, insurance, you had to learn about a new industry sector. And they're all cloaked in a veil of terminology, acronyms. I mean, people in procurement say, oh, procurement's terrible for acronyms. So's engineering. So's everything. So when you're looking at like taxonomic classifications of sectors and things like that, there's always like loads of complication around how it's actually broken down. But I sometimes feel like there's organizations are kind of overcomplicating this. Like, and that's one of the problems. Like you were talking about, like organizations sometimes wanting to drill into, okay, so are Mickey and Johnny working on this project? How much are they getting paid? Where are they based? Which offices are they accessing? What are they actually doing? How many days have they been involved? All this, what are they specifically doing? What are the results like against those individuals? Things like that. When an organization is taking the approach of worrying about the people doing the work, it makes it, in my opinion, very difficult to just buy an outcome, buy an output. With kind of the true kind of like core nature of services procurement is that's what you're buying. That's why you're paying more, and that's why and you're outsourcing the risk, and you're just saying you're passing on the liability and saying, look, however you do it, you've agreed to do it in 3 months for $5 million. Therefore, off you go. Tell me when it's done. Make sure it's on time, and make sure you do a good job. Otherwise, there are penalties and warranties and etc. etc. So where organisations take that point of view, it's a lot simpler for them to be able to put that in a bracket, contract it effectively, measure it effectively, and they could address the issue more than if they're saying, hey, look, for every single one of these service providers, I'm going to need to know what's the day rate. But I need to tie it back to day rates. I need to understand hours, who's doing what, where are they based, all this sort of stuff. That really overcomplicates it, in my opinion. But a lot of companies think like that. Do you think maybe they need to change the way they think, or do you think that some organizations are going to have to work like that and they're going to have to know that information?
Yeah, again, it depends, and I feel like that's what makes the industry complex and also exciting is that with each client and enterprise, like you never know what you're going to get and what's important to them and what, going back to the definition of like what is risky to them. And I mean, I think as an industry, we've having been on the client side, having been on the provider side, I think providers have done a fair job of assessing what they've seen across the industry, from the MSP, from the VMS, from the direct sourcing providers. Like we've generally been able to come to the table of collectively, these are all the things we've seen, and most contingent workforce problems, I know within 30 minutes of a conversation, 80% of what the problem is, right? But then there's nuances within it of how you actually solve for it. So, yeah, I mean, I think generally we've done well with that. I think part of the problem on the client and enterprise side is that there's varying degrees of education and knowledge of this space that the the lowly and lone contingent workforce program owner that has a lot of that collective knowledge of the industry, they're not given the proper pedestal and the proper voicing and the proper positioning within a company to strategically help the business understand all of that and educate them on the changes that they need to make in terms of evaluating a lot of this. I think that becomes part of the bigger problem is yeah, do organizations need to shift? Well, a little bit, yeah, but I think it comes down to enabling a subject matter expert in this space to really help them make the change that's impactful for that particular business. So I'm kind of all over the place with that answer, but it was a tough one to answer.
Well, it's a good point that you make though, because you're talking about who are the responsible parties within an organization, and a lot of the time within a lot of organizations, no one is responsible for services procurement. It's as simple as that. It's like some of it will sit within certain procurement categories and it'll sit across various different services
Yep.
categories: marketing, professional services, IT services, facilities, whatever it might be. And then you might have contingent workforce stakeholders. Does some of it sit there and some of it kind of sits nowhere, and there's POs floating around, and the responsibility is just with the buying manager, effectively the engagement manager who's sitting in the business trying to get the work done, and they can just self sign it off because it's tail spend and it's below $250,000 order value. But it's really interesting now starting to talk to more people that are services procurement specialists, and they're badged as that. It's like, I don't know if you managed to chat to Todd from McDonald's at CWS Dallas. Super interesting guy, and I definitely want to try and get together with him for a conversation around this. But he's a specialist in services procurement, and he's got a team who are specialists in services procurement, and that's a very clear remit to solve this problem and to bring this stuff together, because it's not the same as contingent workforce. It's something different. It's a different work delivery channel, in
Yep.
effect. It's contracted in a different way. The principles are different. The business drivers for using that route are different. And it's like, wow, really forward thinking to see that. But there's not that many people in that situation. There's not that many people doing that or badged as that, with, as you say, the kind of responsibility and the just given the leverage within the business to actually say, right, okay, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to make this a really effective
Yeah.
channel for us to get stuff done. When it needs to be done like this, it's going to work beautifully, and we're going to know we're getting good value, and we're going to know it's all buttoned down and done properly. I'm starting to see more of that starting to happen now.
First off, yeah, Todd's awesome. Shout out to Todd, and he's done some very cool things with the McDonald's program over there, particularly when it comes to the statement of work services procurement area. I mean, and he's very good use case. Yeah, secondly, yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about the dynamic and the difference between contingent work and services procurement. I consider all non-employee talent contingent workforce, and I differentiate, with the staff aug, temporary services, and then IC. But there, yeah, obviously anybody who's listening, you're obviously keen on the difference between the services and the staff aug, and we get all that. There's clear differences there, but I think that's one thing we see with that I've seen personally talking with companies and I'm not picking on the MSP, but what I've heard was feedback of like, well, we don't want the MSP to manage our services procurement. They don't know our business. We don't want them touching our stuff. We don't want them to handle all that. We would rather do that in-house. And that's not a fault of the MSP. I think the opportunity there is you talk about these procurement and services procurement specialists, if they have those type of roles and people that are specifically trained on that, perhaps they can serve a purpose there. But um, it
As in, you're saying
requires
you're saying if the MSP have people who've got those skills, or you're saying if the in-house teams have those capabilities?
Well, I think both sides are obviously important to have is that specialist skill. I think if the MSP wants to take some of that business, obviously they have the right They want to have the right level of skill to A, gain the trust of the business they're working with, and then show their credibility and then do well for the client. And for the MSPs listening, that's you know, no kidding. They know that. They're aware of that. And that's one thing they're working on. But I think there's a fear of how well would they know our business? And I think even if it's internal, they need to be well versed on the processes, the protocols, what's important to them as they're going through, the procurement process with any type of statement of work and making sure that it is a specialist. You can't just throw your recruiter, staff aug, person at this.
100%. 100% no. And do you know what? I think the MSPs are getting better at this. They really are getting better. Some of the MSPs have really invested in bringing in
They have, and
specialists.
MSPs listening. I'm not saying you've done wrong. I think those are just reservations that I've heard from clients, and I know that you're working on that. You're trying to bring the best talent forward, and you're not just throwing your talent acquisition person that's pushing through requisitions on the staff aug side onto the services procurement. Obviously, you want to have the specialized person that knows category management, that knows procurement management, and knows the nuances of navigating a statement of work, that can negotiate. They understand the contractual terms and the terms and conditions that go into a statement of work, and have that relationship management experience as well. It does require a special type of person, but a type of skill set to be able to manage all that.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the pace of change. I mean, I think there's a lot of change going on in procurement in general, definitely from a procurement technology standpoint, in the sense that there's so much change going on in the procurement technology market. Like if you look at marketing technology, it's super mature. Lots of vendors, lots of very big unicorn vendors. It's worth, a large amount of billions in terms of what that technology market is worth. It's quite well established. Procurement technology is just going through an absolute like hockey stick growth phase. Inline hockey, not ice hockey, just in case you were wondering.
All are
Um,
good. All are good.
but that, and so the big suites are becoming less of a thing of like, oh, you can't do anything outside of that. It's just that literally over the last 2 years, that philosophy has just been like broken by the market, just expanding and innovating. And I think just the way that procurement, are involved in the running of businesses and how what their strategic impact is, that's massively changing as well. So seeing people like Todd in a specialist role with the great stuff he's doing, and other people in similar areas, and similar people with basically similar skills operating that across multiple customers within MSPs successfully, where they are building that trust and they are managing to make that move forward. It's a real step change in what organizations are doing. And it's but still, in either case, whether it's McDonald's with what Todd and his team are doing there, or whether it's an organization that have said, well, we can't do it internally, we don't have the talent, therefore we don't have the capacity, therefore we're going to bring in an MSP, you solve that problem and deliver the results for us. Both parties are making a commitment, an investment that's going to solve that problem for them. And what I wanted to kind of like round off the conversation talking about was just what do you see as, what have you seen as, and what do you see as the benefits that organizations can realize? And I know that sounds quite obvious in terms of like, well, clearly it's solving all of the problems we've just been discussing. But in reality, what do you see as the kind of, what are the benefits that just, really stand out that you think organizations should consider when they're looking at this and maybe thinking, haven't got the time, it's too difficult, do we really need to worry about it?
Yeah, I
What
mean,
are
I
the
think it's
wins?
the usual suspects: savings, compliance, and visibility.
No, but other
The
benefits in terms of those.
Yeah, no, I tease because like that. I think rooted in that there's deeper things. I mean, I think it's just about this idea of workforce orchestration and knowing that the problems you're solving, the problems you're attempting to solve, have the appropriate talent aligned to accomplish that. whether that is a temp worker, whether that is a contingent worker, whether that's outsourcing, because we know company X can do this way better than us, more efficiently. Maybe they'll save us money, whatever, but they could do it well because that's what they do. I think it's recognizing like the strength of categorizing work in a way that enables the proper channels to get you the talent or the outcomes that you need. And by not taking that seriously, not investing in the talent, the infrastructure, technology, governance, whatever have you, I think you're missing out. And the way of work is changing as we look at, remote work was hot for like 3 or 4 years through the pandemic. Now there's a lot of the RTO, return to office, but when you look at the capabilities within the freelance sector and the remote work that is often associated with that, man, and the niche talent you could have, there's a lot to be said that I think some companies are starting to stick their head in and look at because I think there's opportunity there. When it comes back to the services procurement side, the benefits they can receive by properly doing it, I think go beyond just those usual suspects of savings, compliance, and visibility. There's peace of mind of knowing that the outcome we're going for is to be met because we have the right provider and it's meeting our individual needs, not just because as an industry says, oh, you should be targeting savings, compliance, and visibility. But hey, you know what? We are getting the visibility and the compliance out of this. We're not saving as much as we want. However, it's giving the outcome we need. And so I think there's just efficiencies that can be gained by aligning the right channels and properly setting up your services procurement team or your MSP or your contingent workforce team to do that. And the benefits, kind of come out based on what your priorities are and what you're moving towards. And it's hard to say like these are the benefits you're going to receive because I think all of those are they're standard ones, but I think they become very unique in the problems that you as a company are trying to solve with talent.
And do you think there's maybe an argument to kind of like um, stack those benefits up to say that ultimately, if you get this stuff organized in terms of your organizational work capacity and work capability, whatever that is, full time employees, interims, temps, contractors, outsourced service providers, if you've got that button down, then you can take a flexible approach in a highly changeable market and you can get stuff done when you need to get it done. And actually, if you don't do that, other people are doing that, or are you gonna be at a disadvantage in the market
Right.
where things are just changing so fast? Is there
Yeah.
an argument for that, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I go back to the idea of workforce planning. Like if you can have under wraps your talent and the visibility, you have a good wrap on the channels to get you the right talent to accomplish the goals you need to do. We go back to the idea of workforce planning. Workforce planning, when you look at your entire human capital spectrum, is absolute chaos. How could I possibly know we're going to need this many FTEs, we need this many temps, we're going to outsource this much? Like that's really hard because business change, there's just so much dynamics in the world that impact that. And I think what even sets it up for further difficulty is by not having a good grasp on your existing workforce to begin with. Once you know that, it enables data of your current state around what the various workforce look like in the problems you solve, the projects you've done, and what you've done with that existing human capital or even on your services as well. So by not doing that, I think you prohibit yourself to have effective, what I wouldn't call workforce planning because that's pure chaos, but tying it back to skills planning. What are the skills that your company needs to accomplish the goals? Because it's no longer this, we need a level 3 database administrator to help us with this. No, we need somebody with XYZ skills. Suddenly, these titles don't matter anymore. And when you start tying your existing workforce, the skills that are there, that enables skills planning, which I think overrides your workforce planning and becomes a more tangible component of that greater planning, which is, like I said, pure chaos. So I think you're trying to tie it back. I think that becomes the ultimate benefit of orchestrating your talent, excuse me, orchestrating your workforce is that it enables you to have a good grasp on the skills you need based on existing data to help you plan for the future and where your business goes and the skills that are needed for that. That's ultimately, I think, the greatest benefit.
I think you put it really well. I remember a CEO of a large global media company once saying to me, um, that one of the most important things I need to know is what is the most effective use of my resources? What capacity and capability can I bring to bear as an organization to do what I need to do? And what's the best use of it? And that it kind of ties into exactly what you're saying
Yeah.
there. It's that capability planning. We see a lot of organizations within their services supply chain doing like horizon planning type exercises of, we're going to need capabilities in AI or cybersecurity or whatever it might be. What do we have? What capability do we have within our supply chain? Do we need to build out that supply chain? Do we need to build the resilience in that supply chain?
Hmm.
It's really interesting to see that sort of stuff starting to come through, because when people can get sight of it, they start getting interested and going, oh, well, who have we got that does this, that, and the other? The opportunities then arise of like, well, we could do this in that mode, or we could do it in that mode of work. And that's where organizations are going to be really effective. So yeah, I think you sum that up very nicely. And for me, that's where it gets really exciting, because what you're doing is you're pulling up out of the kind of like chaotic, bitty, feels like it's complicated and difficult to solve, to coming to the real important thing of saying, how do we make this organization like, razor sharp and really effective and really competitive?
When I love your point around like the supply chain planning, do we have the skills within that supply chain planning to really bring about the skills we think we're going to need in the future? And I think there's also an idea too of when you understand your existing workforce, there's redeployment opportunities there. We know these particular workers with these skills are winding down. Well, let's shift them over here. And I think when you have the proper workforce orchestration with the appropriate skills planning, I think it mitigates some of the risk that companies end up having to, go to layoff because they made a bad bet, right? And I think that's a key piece that you could also prevent that by just appropriately planning the skills that you need, being able to redeploy as needed. And there's just less churn there because you have what you need right in front of you. You have your supply chain to back you up when you're running low with existing talent, existing services. So you have a two-pronged approach that I think makes it more holistic and foolproofing and planning for the future.
Yeah, I think, some people might be sitting there listening to this going, oh, congratulations, guys, you just described the perfect world, but and see it as unattainable. But the great thing now
Easier
is
said than done.
it's
Totally.
easier said than done. 100% agree with you. But actually, it's easier to do than a lot of people think it is. And you've only got to look at people that are already doing it. Like we mentioned Todd earlier, and there's other great examples of organizations that are doing a great job of this. Technology vendors, MSPs, internal procurement teams, contingent workforce teams that are doing great work in this area. And I think it's very important to share the knowledge and to share that information, because it doesn't have to just be classed as, well, there's no way you can solve that. There are people out there solving it and getting the benefits from it now. So
Just a
um,
matter of making it the priority, though. What do you want to solve, and how big of a deal is it to you to solve? Like, is it is it a fair amount of work? Absolutely, all of this is. But what's the
yeah,
priority? And it's not really that hard. You just need to have the right people aligned to do it to bring it to life.
yeah, 100% agree. Excellent stuff. Well, really enjoyed that, Mickey. Thank you so much for joining me again. How could we couldn't have put that in? I mean, imagine if we tried to do that in LinkedIn comments. I think we'd have broken LinkedIn.
We'd still be going, man. We'd only be halfway through the conversation.
So listen, appreciate your time. I appreciate everything you do in the market. Keep it all coming. I love the content you're creating, and I'm glad you're enjoying doing it and getting really, the success you're generating is brilliant to watch with that, and all of the stuff that you're doing. For anyone that doesn't know where to find you, where's the easiest place for people to find you?
Find me on LinkedIn, Mickey Pelletier, cwmstrategies.com. I have a YouTube channel, Spotify channel, all different ways to find me. And Johnny, thanks for having me on your show today. Always lovely to talk with you. And we could probably go another hour here. So this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, that's awesome, Mick. And glad we got together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.